What does Jason Isbell's song catalog tell us about the different eras of his life, both as an artist and as an individual? For over 20 years, Jason Isbell has been one of the predominant forces in Americana music, and I thought it'd be interesting to trace his life, career, and contributions to Americana music by looking at 13 songs that define the different eras of his career. Now, to be clear, these are not my 13 favorite Jason Isbell songs, and I'm not saying that these are the best 13 Jason Isbell songs. These won't even all be Jason Isbell songs. They will also be some songs that relate to him in a specific point in his life, in his career. However, I think for each song selected here, it's going to illuminate a different part of what his life and career were like at that time. So let's dive in. It's important here that we start right at the source with 2003's Decoration Day, off of the Drive-By Truckers album of the same title. At 21, Jason Isbell had joined up with the Truckers as a guitar player, and a few weeks into his tenure with the band, he showed Patterson Hood this song he had penned about a family feud that Isbell's family was actually involved in. It's a matter of public record. You can look up the Lawsons in the Hills. And Isbell has since gone on to joke and say, "Yeah, back then I didn't realize you were supposed to change the names." Patterson immediately saw the potential of the song and the young songwriter, basically saying, "Shit, you can write too." They chose to name the album after the song, and the rest is history. Now, a few years into his time with the Drive-By Truckers, 2004's The Dirty South shows Isbell looking a bit introspective. He's been living hard with these guys on the road, playing shows, and definitely living that rock and roll lifestyle. It's at this point in time he pens the song Danko Manuel, looking at the lives and deaths of the band songwriters Rick Danko and Richard Manuel, two of the most iconic voices in American music who both met untimely tragic ends. Isbell's taking a good hard look at the way he's living and wondering to himself, is that the man I want to be? What it took to probably write that song at that point, the amount of self-awareness, that's why, in my opinion, Danko Manuel is one of Isbell's greatest songs. We're going to go next to the first song on this list that actually wasn't written by Isbell, A World of Hurt off the 2006 Drive-By Truckers album, A Blessing and a Curse. Isbell had now been in the Drive-By Truckers for about 5 years. Tensions were rising within the band. Isbell's antics were getting a bit out of control. There was a rift forming in Isbell's marriage to Drive-By Truckers bass player Shauna Tucker, and things were starting to look really uneasy for the future of the group, his health and safety, and the future of his and Shauna's marriage. Patterson Hood wrote this song, and truth be told, I don't know actually what inspired it. If I'm going to be honest, I'm probably mostly associating it with this period in time, because it was featured in the Drive-By Truckers documentary, A Secret to a Happy Ending, right at the point where they're talking about Isbell's Drive-By Truckers downfall. It might not be accurate to say the song sums up the unraveling of his and Shauna's relationship and his time in the Drive-By Truckers, but it certainly feels like a fitting backdrop to it. Isbell was kicked out of the Drive-By Truckers Easter weekend 2007, started working on a solo album produced by Patterson Hood, and on this record, Isbell released a song called The Magician, where the narrator was a gifted performer who lost everything. I think you can kind of see the parallel I'm trying to draw here. 2007 Sirens of the Ditch is still remembered quite favorably among Isbell's most hardcore fans, and paved the way to him having a solo career. However, the early days of that solo career weren't so easy. Isbell had just been kicked out of one of the most celebrated bands in rock and Americana at the time, and while he had good fitting to begin a career on his own, it was going to be a long uphill fight. Isbell put together a band called the 400 Unit, named after a local mental institution, and together they released a self-titled album in 2009. I had a lot of trouble deciding what song off of this album I wanted to point toward, but I think the one that really sums it up most is The Blue, which kind of has this feeling of isolation and drifting, a sense of hopelessness to it, and the narrator's literally sitting in a strip club, crying into his beer, watching a girl dance. I think it's probably fair to say Isbell was looking for comfort in the arms of other people who were just as lost as he was at this time, which is why I think this song really sums up that era very well. By the time 2011's Here We Rest came around, Isbell was starting to build some steam behind him. It started to seem like his best days were no longer behind him, especially when the song Alabama Pines won Song of the Year at the Americana Music Awards. The song portrays a pretty universal feeling of wanting to go home that I think connected with a lot of people and really gave him a career boost at the time. But his reputation for hard living, hard partying, and hard drinking were just growing. I'm not sure if it's a match made in heaven or a match made in hell, but around this time, Isbell meets Raleigh, North Carolina-based American Aquarium frontman BJ Barham and agrees to produce their 2012 album Burn.Flicker.Die. Burn.Flicker.Die is kind of considered American Aquarium's classic record. If there's one record that the fans love more than any, it's probably this one. At that time, BJ Barham had the same reputation for hard living and hard drinking that Isbell had, and it seems only fitting that they would come together on a record about being casualties of rock and roll and what that kind of lifestyle does to people. The album's title track, Burn.Flicker.Die, sums it up best, with lines like, Can't turn down the drinks when they're free. I wish my addictions didn't mean so much, but we all can't be born with that kind of luck. And of course the song's chorus, we are no different than the neon lights. Turn us on, we stay up all night. Do what we can, we put up a fight. We burn too long, we flicker and die. Fortunately for both Isbell and Barham, they didn't burn, flicker, and die following this album. Their best days were still ahead of them. After a particularly difficult night on tour with American Aquarium in Richmond, Virginia, then girlfriend and touring member of the 400 unit Amanda Shires convinced Isbell to get sober. With the help of friends and family, Isbell found himself in rehab and in recovery, and has now been sober for 11 years. BJ Barham would follow a couple years later on his own choice, and I don't think either of them regrets the decision to get sober. Both are definitely an inspiration to people in recovery. Freshly sober and trying to find his footing, Isbell penned Cover Me Up as a love song to Amanda Shires, reflecting on the past decade of carnage in his personal life and sharing his devotion to her and his newfound sobriety. This is one of the most touching love songs of all time. I mean, it is an absolutely beautiful song, and in the late 2010s became somewhat of a standard in the Americana and country music scene, being covered by a great many artists. I know what some of you all are thinking, we'll get to that. This song was attached to the 2013 record Southeastern. Everything from this point was growth. Of course, when you have a big breakout album, and especially one as deep and personal as Southeastern, there's a lot of anticipation for the follow-up. I don't think the Something More Than Free record quite hit the same high as Southeastern, but it does contain some of my favorite Isbell songs, including this next one, which I think sums up this whole era, If It Takes a Lifetime. Isbell's looking at all this newfound good in his life, and making a commitment to continue to better himself, to try and live up to who he wants to be, even if it takes a lifetime. It's also just kind of like a fun little jam. I like this song a lot. It was also announced in the lead up to this album that Isbell and Amanda were having a daughter, which made this commitment ring even stronger. That if he wasn't doing it for himself, he was at least doing it for his family. Now you notice with this song and a lot of others, Isbell's taking his own perspective and experience and inserting it into the life of a character he creates. Isbell does a good job of balancing his own experience with those of others, trying to blur that line between fiction and non-fiction, but sometimes there's a song in his catalog that you know is coming straight from the heart. Something More Than Free came out in 2015, and the next year found America in the grips of one of the most tumultuous presidential elections in its history. And so by the time Isbell started working on 2017's The Nashville Sound, his mind was definitely starting to shift more towards politics in a way it never really had before. Now, it's not to say previous Isbell records and songs hadn't contained politics. I mean, off Sirens of the Ditch, The Devil Is My Running Mate is a pretty searing indictment of Dick Cheney. However, I don't think it really packs the same punch as his song White Man's World, where Isbell takes a good hard look at his privilege as a straight white male in a country that was built for and by straight white males. This song deals heavily with race, talking about past injustices, times he wishes he would have said something when someone made an off-color joke, and just the crushing weight of what racism really means on a societal level. But it's not entirely about race, it's also about gender. It is the man part of White Man's World, where he's looking at his wife and daughter and realizing just how much harder this world is going to be for them as well. The song does end on a note of hope, Isbell looking into the eyes of his daughter and thinking about all the good that she and her generation can do. This was the most political Isbell had been in a song up to this point. However, he wouldn't just leave it there. Isbell really does live his politics, and he often pisses off the more right-leaning factions in country music media. And if you don't realize this, yes, there is kind of a spectrum there, with his progressive viewpoints and stances. In 2021, when Morgan Wallen was caught on camera saying the N-word, Isbell pledged all the royalties he received from Wallen's cover of Cover Me Up to the NAACP. When touring came back in 2021 as well after the pandemic, Isbell enforced a strict masks and vaccination policy at his shows, and actually canceled concerts at venues that wouldn't adhere to it. He also famously books female artists and minority artists to open the shows at his Ryman run every year to try and expose them to a new audience. Isbell certainly lives his politics, and I think that's something to be admired. You know, it's one thing to write a stance in a song, but it's another thing to actually live it. He definitely took something away from those days in the drive-by truckers. Up to this point, a lot of Isbell's career and public image had been built around this idea of him being a family man. Him and Amanda were seen as a power couple in the Americana music scene, and they were admired and beloved by many. But something started to happen following the Nashville Sound. Amanda started joining the 400 unit on tour less and less, seeking to double down more on her artistic ambitions. However, the idea that there was something wrong didn't really come around until 2020's Reunions album, and even then it was kind of more rumors than anything. However, in hindsight, it's pretty clear to see that the song Overseas might have been a little bit predictive of things to come. The song's narrator talks about feeling a growing distance in his relationship with his significant other, and explores how they can reconcile that, or if they can even reconcile it at all. If you want to talk about Isbell's songwriting, you should really look at the specific word choices in this song. I saw you on your wedding night, and I watched you sleeping in my arms. Holy crap. And then, of course, in the chorus, our love won't change, our love won't change, our love won't change a thing. Showing that there's still love despite the distance. Because Isbell tends to write from character standpoints, I don't think a lot of people looked too much into this at the time, and a lot of the details of this weren't really revealed until Sam Jones's documentary, Running with Our Eyes Closed, came out a few years later, where we saw how the making of reunions actually drove a huge wedge in between Jason and Amanda's relationship. This was difficult for a lot of people because I think a lot of people had them on a pedestal as an idyllic couple. There's definitely like a lot of parasocial relationship things going on with fans, looking at them and wanting them to be this perfect couple. I think it's fair to say, like, you can look at that and be like, oh, yeah, you shouldn't invest yourself too much in the relationship of people that you don't even know. And yeah, that's true. But I think when it's deliberately made a part of your public image, I do think it gets a little more complicated in that scenario. That doesn't mean he doesn't deserve any sympathy for it, because obviously when your dirty laundry is on display, nobody likes that. However, I do have a hard time faulting fans for being invested in this relationship because it is such a big part of both of their stories. And that's why when Amanda Shires released the song Fault Lines, it was a gut punch for a lot of Isbell fans. The whole narrative around this album was about Jason and Amanda's relationship trouble, and how there were a lot of things going on behind the scenes that we couldn't see that were causing a lot of strain and pain in their relationship. The song is particularly accusatory towards Isbell, talking about the character that he wrote for himself, referencing the song Flagship, which is an idyllic love song Isbell wrote for Amanda, and basically calling it all part of a trick. And just talked about all the pain they were going through at that point in time. By the way, Isbell played on this song and on this record. You've got to give them credit for their ability to support one another even when they're talking about one another in a negative light. I mean, that's hard. However, they talked about the time like, we had this trouble, we worked through it, we're fine now, but this art came out of this particularly difficult period. Fans of both artists knew there was some trouble in Paradise, however, I don't think thought much of it following this. I mean, every couple, even the best couples, fight. Everyone has trouble in their relationship from time to time. In 2023, Isbell released his much acclaimed album Weather Vanes, which was his first self-produced album. And I think no song off this album really highlights the decline that we've been seeing more than the closing track Miles, which again is written from a character's point of view, but is definitely being pulled from Isbell's real life, where he's seeing once again more distance in this relationship with his lover. There's miles between us, but boy, you should have seen us when we met. Also talking about growing distance between him and his daughter. Again, fictional in this case. Miles is this big, epic rocking song, somewhere between Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, David Bowie and the Beatles at different parts of it. It's a three-part suite that starts with acknowledging the distance that has been growing in the relationship. In the middle has an angry stomp, harping on all the different reasons, all the small things that led to this distance, and then ends kind of coming to terms with it, but in an uncertain way. There are a lot of songs off Weather Vanes that point to difficulty in relationships, but I think Miles is the most prophetic of all of them. In early 2024, it was leaked that Isbell and Amanda had filed for divorce. They haven't spoken much publicly about this, and I think that's okay. Again, so much of their public image is built around their relationship. It must be really difficult also for both of them to have to constantly kind of be competing with one another to some degree. They're supporting one another, but I'm sure there's some interpersonal dynamics going on there that are hard to get around. But I'm hoping for each of their sake in this period, they can get a fresh start as new artists. Having a public relationship like theirs has got to be extremely challenging, and I just hope that they're able to recover from it on a personal level. I do wonder if Miles sonically is going to be a sign of things to come. I think the next album is either going to be the divorce album, if Weather Vanes isn't already, or it's going to be a really loud rocking album, or it's going to be both. There's a lot yet to be seen. Jason Isbell is one of my favorite artists. If you haven't checked him out before, you should, because there's a lot of great music to dive in on. And I hope this video gave you a starting point. I'm Brent Funkhauser from Red Moon Media. Thanks for watching and following along. More stuff like this on the way. Thank you.